At this time, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker to you. Dr. Evan Auguste is an assistant professor of psychology at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and is a scholar in residence at Boston College's Institute for Study of Race and Culture. And so he received his Ph.D. in clinical psychology with a major area of focus in forensic psychology, and that was from Fordham University back in 2022. So Dr. Auguste identifies as Haitian-American, and that identity as a Haitian-American man has helped to inform his work in how he examines the U.S.'s history of anti-Blackness, and it has shaped his psychological realities, both within the U.S. and outside of this country. He also directs the A.S.I.L.I collective, and that's a research group that focuses broadly on addressing mental health consequences and structural anti-Blackness. He has recently published an edited volume of The Carceral State and Forensic Psychology and Black Resistance, Let Them Not Be Forgotten. And so you should speak to him more about that after he speaks in the Q&A. And that offers psychological tools and praxis to resist state violence and co-create community justice. He currently chairs the Sawubona Healing Circle program and is on the board of the Institute for Development of Human Arts and on the leadership team for Incultured Company. So today, it's my pleasure to bring Dr. Auguste to the podium, and he will be talking to you about From Womb to Wisdom, Healing Circles and the Reclamation of Black Consciousness. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Evan Auguste. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This is like a deep, deep honor. My mother's right here in the crowd, and one of my, what's going on, Natasha? How you doing? One of my earliest home videos that we have of me is me being born with my parents and them saying that they wanted me to be a tennis player. Unfortunately, I was not nearly that talented. I hit all the balls over the fence. So I figured this would be the next best thing, is honoring the legacy of Arthur Ashe. And so what this talk is going to do, and I loved hearing about the work that was just shared, right? Breaking the stigma, showing that it's our people who have all the wisdom necessary to heal us in this time. And what I want to do through this first part of this talk is talk about the other side of stigma, right? Not just the ways that our people need to embrace mental health, but ways in which aspects of mental health have been crafted against us, right? Against Black people, and the ways that we continue to fight against that. I wanted to begin by grounding in Arthur Ashe's analysis of the current predicament, right? So this is Arthur Ashe. He said this in his memoir. He said, "As for the very existence of African Americans in the United States, I truly believe that many people wish that we would go away, vanish, cease to exist. Doubtless, even many Blacks have that feeling and wish that they could lose their color in a tide of whiteness." Right? The idea that for us to exist in this country, for us to exist in this society, is dealing with a constant wave of people who want to erase not just our bodies, but our minds, our way of understanding the world, and our way that we want to love one another. To paint this out, right, I'm a professor, so we're going to go a little bit into some of the history, some of the frameworks that exist. Some scholars have talked about this concept, this idea of internal colonialism. Right? To shape what this looks like, we can look only back to 2020. We had the largest mass mobilization of Black people with a very specific, tight policy goal, right? We want to reshape how safety looks like in our communities. We want to reshape how policing looks like in our communities. And in response, in the years immediately following these mass protest movements, in fact, throughout the country, you saw police budgets balloon, right? Very tight, very specific, coordinated efforts, and we see the state move in the exact opposite direction in many instances. We had in 2020 and 2021 the associations, the largest associations of psychologists, of psychiatrists, of medicine, right, admit to near genocidal projects of harm against Black peoples. I want people to take time, right? In 2020, a lot of societies were putting out statements and apologies for racism, and I don't think we fully sat with the full weight of what they were admitting to. Right? Within psychology, we're talking about a project of eugenics, right? Projects of death, of harm, right? For our major associations that we look to for health. We know, and this is from some of the work of one of my colleagues at Howard University, Marcus Board Jr., talks about how often Black political will is strategically dismissed, right? There will be on the surface, acts and efforts that seem to honor that, but in terms of the actual policy that gets put into place, we often see it moved in the exact opposite direction. And so for people who have a very wise, a very consistent view of how we want to look after ourselves and to have that consistently dismissed, right? Harold Cruz, Kwame Ture described that as the state of an internal colony, right? I want to name that, although I was reading through his memoir, Arthur Ashe had some choice words to say for Kwame Ture and the Black Power movement. I think the piece that a lot of them did agree with is the state of harm that we are experiencing. And so that's our political state, right? That's the economic and structural state that we exist in. What I want us to understand is how this impacts us psychologically. Right? That's a lot of the work that I do, is how does this structural consequence, this structural context, how does that impact us psychologically? The psychologist who educated a number of the Black Panthers in Chicago, Bobby Wright, described this as menticide. Right? So menticide is the psychological consequences specifically, right, of state-based policy. Right? When they deny our will, when they deny the way that we want to take care of one another, when they police us when we need care, right, this has downstream psychological effects. Right? And so some of the research has demonstrated this distorts our identity, it distorts our consciousness, and there are several downstream effects. We've already talked about previously suicidality, depression, right? Post-traumatic as well as complex trauma. A lot of the psychological consequences that we want to show up for each other and help us deal with are downstream of these specific policy decisions. And it frames, again, these structural harms as personal pathology. And so what I want us to do is become critical consumers then of psychology and mental health. Right? It's not merely that there are a lot of individual racists, right? It's that structurally a lot of the things that we look to for health have been conspired to move against us. I'm a big fan of this quote. How you doing? I'm a big fan of this quote by Terry Ellis Pickens. She says, "Within the United States cultural zeitgeist, there's no blackness without madness, nor madness without blackness." What she's saying here is often we think the problem is, right, there are a lot of racist people who are doing mental health. If we get other types of people doing mental health, it'll be better. But what our research, what our history, what our science shows us is the way that we've constructed psychology, the way that we've constructed mental health, the way that we've constructed the mind has been done, right, to subjugate and erase, right, the psychologies and the consciousness of Black people. And this is not esoteric, this is not niche history. This is from some of the largest psychologists and psychological thinkers that we have. Right? G. Stanley Hall, I don't know if people have taken intro yet. G. Stanley Hall is the first American psychologist. In some of his earliest writings, right, he talked about how the African person needed to be in a context of enslavement in order for there to be a healthy society. Right? He described that state as the natural one for African American people and saw the consistent surveillance of Black people as necessary for white America to have health. Carl Jung, right, a very influential psychodynamic thinker. A lot of his ideas around the collective unconscious came from his interactions with the Ugandan and the Bantu peoples. Right? And instead of seeing that as a wondrously complex society and people, he saw that as the most base form of human being. And so his very idea of psychoanalysis was based on the fact that African people had a primitive consciousness. Right? This shapes the development of psychodynamic and therapeutic practice. We move towards a Robert Yerkes. Robert Yerkes is one of the earliest presidents of the American Psychological Association, and in his advocacy, he said that gorillas were better suited for the menial tasks of society than black people because of IQ. These are not niche figures, these are foundational figures in the construction of psychology and mental health. And so these ideas, these theories, they lead to diagnoses, right? They lead to the very practice of this field. So some people might have heard of drapetomania. Anybody heard of drapetomania before? I'm saying yes, a few people, right? Drapetomania, constructed by Samuel Cartwright, was the idea that when black people desired freedom, when they pursued freedom, right, that represented a mental illness, again, because the natural condition of the African person was to be enslaved. And to move against your natural condition was seen as insanity. For anybody who knows a little bit of history, I know I got at least one Haitian person here, right? Samuel Cartwright, right, said the largest example of drapetomania was actually the Haitian Revolution, right? We move forward, right? We go to the early 1900s. We see a lot of psychologists, a lot of even liberal psychologists move forward with this idea that black people have a general intellectual inferiority, right? That their minds are less developed, and so that we need to engage in a project of eugenics by societies like the Human Betterment Foundation to remove people from the gene pool. We move forward to the 60s and 70s. You have a group of psychiatrists who create the idea of the protest psychosis. Right? The protest psychosis, some people might have heard of this, is the idea when they started institutionalizing disproportionately black men who were on the front lines of the Black Power movement. Right? They were taking their presentation, they were taking their politics and allowing it to reshape their idea of psychosis. So the idea of schizophrenia that we have now, right, is based on the specific and intentional oppression of black political actors during the Black Power movement. And we see a series, right, a wave of systematic institutionalization. Right? I know we have some psychiatrists coming up afterwards. I see this right here. Right? I want to pull from Frantz Fanon. Right? He's a legendary revolutionary psychiatrist who says psychiatry is an auxiliary of the police. The way in which this field historically and at times right now in the modern day is used is to reinforce these specific forms of harm, right? To reinform the status quo, to maintain the state of African American people as a resource-deprived internal colony. And so how does this look like today then? I told y'all that the protest psychosis reshaped our idea of schizophrenia, and we continue to see this. Right? We know when black and white people present with similar symptoms, black people are more likely to be diagnosed with psychotic disorders, white people are more likely to be diagnosed with mood disorders. We know when in vignette studies, when they do specifically psychotic symptoms, black people are more likely to advocate for the use of police against black people. People are more likely to advocate for the use of care for white people. Right? And so this idea, this perceived psychosis, which we knew is rooted, right, in state repression, is believed to be one of the mechanisms that drives the disproportionate institutionalization of black people. But what I want us to also carry, right, so this is the way that we do health, right, this is the way that we experience distress is pathologized. When I talked about drapetomania, I wanted to be clear, right? Drapetomania isn't about only how we experience stress, it's how we pursue freedom. And so we know there's also contemporary responses to black consciousness, right? Our black political will that continue that same legacy. We know that about 7 years ago, that black identity extremism became a priority for the FBI. We know that the FBI intentionally embedded informants throughout several racial justice movements moving into 2020. We know that protest-related charges were federalized so that prosecutors could penalize people for engaging in their civic duties with greater intensity. We saw that this was racialized, right? A number of journalists revealed that for engaging in similar types of engagements, black and white people had disparate charges, with black people facing harsher criminal penalties. And we also have reported instances throughout the US of the police infiltrating and sabotaging community forms of justice and care. And what I want to note is this is all prior to Project 2025. This all prior to our contemporary moment where we have ICE on the streets, where we have people specifically criminalizing the study of our history and our education. I know a lot of professors at HBCUs right now who are telling me that they're afraid to teach about the way that we can take care of our people. Right? So all this is going on before we even reach to this moment. So then what do we do? Right? What do we do when we're faced with this wave of racial harm, this wave of racial trauma, this politicized attacks? I want us to also take a note of the context and the structure of our current mental health force. This comes from the Association of Black Psychologists. They did a workforce report, I believe, in 2022 or 2023. We know that for this scale and this weight of harm, Black people only make up about 4 to 5% of the total mental health workforce. We know that 28% of people in the Black people in the mental health workforce considered leaving because of burnout, race-related stress, and the increased workload. And we know that 62% of those Black mental health workers reported receiving no training specifically on how to treat Black people. I describe this as the other side of stigma because I know there's been a really large movement to make sure that Black people are aware and are open to receiving mental health care. And I believe it's extremely important for us to apply the same critical eye to the mental health structure that we're asking people to embrace. Right? This is Thomas Insel. He's the former director of the NIMH who says, I spent 13 years at the NIMH really pushing on the neuroscience and genetics of mental disorders. And when I look back on that, I realized that while I think I succeeded in getting lots of really cool papers published by cool scientists at fairly large cost, I think 20 billion, I don't think we moved the needle in reducing suicide, reducing hospitalizations, improving recovery for the tens of millions of people who have mental illness. That's the current structure of our mental health apparatus, and we know it is significantly more dire for our people. And so I was a part of a task force during the pandemic, co-chaired with Dr. Jonisha Hickson, in rejecting the American Psychological Association's apology for racism because it was incomplete. It did not reference the totality of the history that I'm talking to you about right now. The way that these forces are not only in history, they continue to assault us day by day. If you go to any of these hospitals, I worked at a forensic hospital for a number of years, it is disproportionately Black people who are in their pain and in their stress are invisibilized and erased and harmed inside these institutions. And we need a psychology, we need a practice that embraces the fullness of our political reality. I'm gonna pull again from Arthur Ashe, who said, I myself do not have to be convinced that Europeans are skeptical about scientific claims by Africans emerging out of Africa, or that many whites do not associate scientific discoveries with Blacks. The image of Africa remains disfigured by notions of ignorance and superstition that were so carefully draped about the continent over the centuries. So what I want to suggest to you all is that we have the type of wisdom, we have the type of science, we have the type of spirit that we can lean on to address the fullness of the harm that we are currently experiencing. The people you see before you are some of the pioneers in the African-centered healing circle movement. You see Enola Aird, Mami Huberta Jackson-Lohman, Cheryl Grills, Anel Prim, Theopia Jackson, and Daryl Rowe, many of whom who do work with the Association of Black Psychologists, and over the last 30 years have been really key in uplifting and training people globally in the art of African-centered healing circles. So what are African-centered healing circles is a great question. I'm happy you asked. That's why I'm here today, right? So African-centered healing circles are a grassroots, community-driven, sacred space, right? As opposed to trying to lean more and more into the professionalization of care, we want to return, as the Arthur Ashe Institute is doing, return the technologies of care to the people who are most impacted, right? And we ground them in these histories and in these wisdoms of care. right, of our African and African diasporic tradition and cultures. Right? A lot of African-centered psychologists are very key. As long as people have been alive, as long as people have existed, they've also been inquiring to what it means to be well and what it means to be. Right? And so leaning into some of those wisdom and those philosophies to co-create spaces of care and health. And because of this, they're specifically targeted towards the emotional, spiritual, and psychological wounds of this consistent political attack on our people. And these are not just theories, right? I'm very key to say this. I'm an assistant professor. I engage in the work of science. And we've demonstrated efficacy, right, in reducing the symptoms of racial trauma, people who have experienced community violence, and deep grief. Right? We have several academic papers that are published now and several that are coming out in the following years. And these are key, right? In these spaces, in these circles, we don't rely on the expertise of an individual professional, right? They're non-hierarchical spaces that honor the way that we all show up for one another. Right? And y'all saw that talked about in the youth program, right? When you allow people to heal in community, you see a tremendous amount of success. What I want to name, specifically for this piece, is they're also a conduit for what me and a number of my colleagues and people before us call a collective Black consciousness. So it's not only that they help us heal from psychological pain, it helps us construct a political future. So collective Black consciousness, as described by my colleague, this is an initiative led by Nkemka and Yewo, is a living synergy of ways of knowing and being that is oriented toward the collective actualization and liberation of Black communities. Collective Black consciousness is love in practice. It is shaped by transcendence of physical space and time to access the deepest manifestations of Black cultural wisdom. Right? This is the way historically our freedom fighters, our political organizers, our soldiers have thought about what it means to be well. We also have a really beautiful photo. Right? So you can see right here on the figure the dimensions of this collective Black consciousness, right? So surrounded, shaped by socio-political transcendence and liberatory practice, right? That is what shapes our collective Black consciousness. Several key pillars being a collective Black identity. It's not about the individual, it's about how we show up and how we identify with the collective, right? Collective Black knowledge, right? Knowledge of our history, right? The way that we've been, the way that we've acted in order to support a collective Black wisdom, right? How do we use this knowledge in order to better our people? All of which surrounds and uplifts a Black radical love, right? The way that we show up for one another to liberate one another. And so what I want to show to you all is how our Sawubona healing circles, right, shape and promote not just the reduction in psychological stress, but the promotion of this liberatory vision. So the Sawubona healing circles in 2020 were created in response to a call from Leonard Dunstan, who was the past leader of the Black Family Summit. They were developed by the Association of Black Psychologists. I was honored to co-chair that along with Dr. Tania Lodge. Again, these are community-defined evidence approach, right? We allow the community to define whether or not we're being effective and how they want us to shift and change our practice. And so over the last 5 years, we've trained over 200 Healing Circle leaders globally. They've been held in Haiti, the Dominican Republic, South Africa, United Kingdom, Jamaica. We actually have a special circle specifically for people who experienced displacement during the hurricane in Jamaica on Friday. And more in response to significant political and racial trauma. So I want to demonstrate to you all how do our circles shape consciousness. And so what I'm going to pull from is a qualitative analysis that our researchers did, led by Angela Haney and Sherelle Bellamy, both at the Yale School of Medicine. We interviewed several people who had attended the healing circles for an extended period of time to watch how they shifted their consciousness. So we saw, and I'm going to show a quote of each pillar, right? We saw the growth in people's engagement in liberatory practice. From participant 100, somebody said, "My identity now is that I no longer take institutional abuse. I know my rights. I can stand in a place of, yes, this is happening, but I can also advocate for myself from a place of strength because of Sawubona. I didn't have that before." We see socio-political transcendence. It allows me to have a lot more grace and to stop taking the things that I experience so personally, because across the country, this stuff is systemic. And even across the world, as Black folks, we deal with the gaslighting and the othering. It has impacted me positively to have a space to not feel gaslit and feel validated by the experiences that I've gone through. It's shaping a collective Black identity, right? So these practices, right, shape a way of understanding ourselves in unison. 104 said, I understand my community as something more than just people from Brazil. I understand my community as Black folks sharing the same experience throughout the Americas and also from Africa. Sometimes we belong to another class or we have another gender. I had to think, okay, we are African descent. We have to think the same way. It's not true. When I meet an African person who doesn't think the same way, I have this empathy. And it's my brother and sister. We are under the same system in the same situation, maybe denying, but with respect. And so we see this across the board with a lot of the people who attend our healing circles, is the growth in these ideas of kinship and these senses of collectivity. It shapes collective Black knowledge, right? The way that we understand ourselves and our history. We had people from all over the world, someone from Liberia educating us. Everybody just came with a wealth of knowledge. We found out about why certain observances came about. We talked about death. We talked about happiness. We talked about gun violence, every conversation. I have not been on a Salboni healing circle where I have not been impacted by something from the group. Right? And again, these are not people who are traditional scholars. These are not people who are traditional psychologists. It's demonstrating that everybody in their life experience has something to offer and to better the collective knowledge of people who are present, which shapes collective Black wisdom. I feel stronger. I had to wait a long time to feel strong, to have answers for all kinds of situations, and also to protect others when they are victims of direct racism in front of my eyes, right? So taking those histories, right, taking those legacies and using it to better understand from a place of wisdom how to support one another. And all of this, right, leads to the growth of what we call a Black radical love. From participant 100, how many lifetimes do I have to be miserable? I don't. I know what that place is. It's a dark place, and I don't ever want to go back there again. So Sawubona has helped me stay in this beautiful, wonderful place. For me, the outside world's hate is the sunken place, and I'm never going to that sunken place again. The circles help me stay out of the sunken place. So I wanted to close with another quote he gave in an interview to UCLA when he was promoting his book. He said, Arthur Ashe said, I would open up the LA Times and see that students from North Carolina A&T and Morgan State and Howard, are being attacked by dogs and have horses on them. They're being beat over the head for sitting in a restaurant. That's what I used to see in the LA Times when I was at UCLA. And if you were Black and from the South and had any feeling at all, you felt you should be sitting there with them. In our time right now, we're experiencing significant ICE violence, significant state violence, significant specific targeted precarity. I want to close with honoring that legacy. Right? The way that we heal through this, right, the way that we build forward is by sitting in a circle together, being intentional and being honest about our situation so that we can build our future. Right? What always is said in the circles is that we are each other's medicine. Right? And that's how we build forward. Thank you very much.
No, you can stay. Okay. They are the chairs. Thank you so much. Let's give Dr. Auguste another round of applause for that. So we wanted to open up at this time for questions and that you may have. There are mics located in the front of the room, so if you have questions, we'll ask that you come to the mic and so that we can have the questions answered. Yes, see a hand over here. If you could come up to the mic so that they can hear you, because it's being recorded. So if you can speak into the mics when you come up so that we can get the questions answered as quickly as possible.
My question is, can you touch as a black man, and I'm sure throughout your career you have experienced the emotional impact of how mental wellness and mental health is being viewed by society. So can you touch on the societal pressure and perception of mental health of black men?
Yeah, of course. It's a great question. I think the thing that I've struggled with the most is this, I think, paradox that structurally people put black men in at times. I've noticed there's this big movement to ask black people to be more, or black men in particular, more forthcoming about their emotions, about the way that they show up, about what they're going through and what they're feeling. And without the full, I think, context that it can be a very dangerous thing to do. You know, I had a colleague of mine, she's again, brilliant psychologist, she's a white woman, who came to me asking for help with one of her cases. It was somebody at the VA. It was a black man who wouldn't open up to her, and we're talking, and it's like, I don't know how to get this, macho man to open up. He don't want to do it. What's going on? And I asked her, okay, how did he get to you? He said, well, so he had gone into the VA, asked for services, explained how miserable he was. They institutionalized him, right? Day one. Right? And so this is somebody who's seen, if I am vulnerable, if I explain how I'm feeling, the pain that I'm going through, is going to be read as either dangerous to myself or to other people, right? And so there's an unfair predicament we put people in without addressing that we haven't created a safe context for people to feel the entirety of their emotions. Working at a lot of the state hospitals, I see so many cases like that. And so I say that's the biggest bind, where I think we have to address this, structurally, not just asking what can we do to make people be more vulnerable. How can we build the skill set to make it safe for people to be vulnerable? Right? Asking both of those things. They're both issues. I think we put a little bit more pressure on one than the other, is what I would say. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I think there's another question over here.
Hey.
No.
Okay. All right. Hey. Thank you, Dr. Auguste, for this presentation. I have so many things to say, but I'm just going to keep it brief. You mentioned the way we structure psychology, right, is the issue. So to me, my question is, how do you dismantle that? Like, does that mean now that everything that psychology is built on is no longer? Like, we need to reframe the way that we think about these things? And then also, I want you to talk a little bit about Black consciousness. And I can't remember if it was Toussaint Louverture or Jean-Jacques Dessalines that said that everyone now is Black. Mm-hmm. I don't remember which one. But
Dessalines.
Dessalines, okay, thank you. And I'm wondering if this definition of Black consciousness that you put on the screen is the same as Dessalines. And what I take Dessalines to say is that Blackness, whiteness, all of this is just a construct. And we've created society around this construct. And I think for liberation to occur, I think we need to transcend, I love that word, I think we need to transcend these limited beliefs of who we are based on a skin color, based on a last name, based on an accent, a language that you speak. We're more than that. And I think that the sunken place is the place where we believe in these limited identities. And so for us to understand that there is no separation. I think that that's really the foundation of what true mental health is to realize that you are not separate from anything. The universe, the world, people, no matter if you look different or whatever, those are inconsequential. So that's what I wanted to say.
Beautiful.
Basically.
I love this. So you had two questions. The first of which was, what do we do if psychology has been constructed this way? And the other one was a deeper question about consciousness, right? So to the first piece, I'm a Black psychologist with a capital B, right? There are, as Karenga dictates them, right, about 3 schools of Black psychology that dictate what do we do within the broader field of psychology. So there are some people who advocate for what's called the traditional school, right, which is I'm going to just engage in the general practice of psychology in an anti-racist way, right? I know that my colleagues are racist. I'm going to do the best I can with the tools that I have to show up for the people in front of me, right? That's seen as like the traditional school. That's like a Alvin Poussin. That's like a Kenneth Clark, Mamie Clark, for example. There's the more reformist branch, which is saying there's been a lot of really strong foundation placed in psychology. We just need some novel ideas, right? Some new concepts that we can better work with our people, right? So people like a William Cross, who goes ahead and develops this specific idea of the development of Black identity. There's people like a Helen Neville, who does a lot of really great work on the impact of colorblind ideology, as an example. So people were saying, psychology, there's a lot of good stuff here. We just need to add some new arms to it so we could better hold our people. I do a lot of my work from between this second school and what's called the third school, the radical school of Black psychology, which is saying we need to build up an entirely new field, right? This is people like a Wade Nobles, people like an Asa Hilliard, like a Linda James Myers, who are saying, as opposed to rooting our idea of the mind in, let's say, Enlightenment era thought, let's honor the indigenous wisdoms of people that have always existed, and then what do our theories and ideas about the mind look like if we root our psychology, if we begin our study of psychology there. So you'll see a lot of those people who study indigenous peoples globally. They'll look at River Nile civilizations and thinking about their ideas and theories of the mind, and then the entire theory moves from that. A lot of the contemporary Black psychologists feel theorize a lot from the philosophies of the Bantu Congo peoples, as an example. So I lean more towards that. I think within the Haitian historical tradition, there's a lot of emphasis on that piece as well, right? How can we use the knowledge, spiritual system of Vodou as a healing practice and philosophy? So I think there's a lot of real effort there. Our healing circles lean into that school of psychology. The second question you had was about Black consciousness broadly. I want to name that in terms of our specific construction of Black consciousness, it rests on a lot of the work of Steve Biko that he was doing in apartheid South Africa, but it also honors all the liberatory fighters, all the traditions, right? Not just the people who fought for freedom in Haiti, but also the Maroon societies throughout the Americas, as an example. And I would agree with you, right? I think Frantz Fanon would agree with you. I think Arthur Ashe would agree with you. I think Arthur Ashe said it in a lot of ways, and I heard him say this quote like 3 times when I was studying for this. He's like, I think I would have been a better tennis player if I didn't have to worry about all this racism, right? I couldn't be like John McEnroe and just sleep, breathe, eat, tennis. I had to be great and then also worry about all these other pieces. So in many ways, he's a humanist. What I would say to that is, for us to then reckon with, right, the just scale and scope of resources that are being poured into constricting our consciousness like that, right? The degree to which, right, we're not allowed to talk about our histories, like that is being outlawed, right? The degree to which the way that we want to show up and care for one another, right, is being propagandized and pushed out of public conversation, right? There's a lot of resources, and if you start talking about like military budget, trillions of dollars poured into restricting the ways that we can see ourselves as human, right? So I agree with you on the solution. I think I'm trying to get us situated in the full, I guess, like systemic weight of what we're fighting against, if that makes sense. Natasha, I'm gonna talk to you later.
I know, we're gonna talk later.
Like, let me ask you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Sochan. I'm from the Caribbean. Just two quick points, really. The first one has to do with your stats show that I believe there were 4 to 5% of the mental health professionals are black in the American landscape.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, based on the theme of your talk, whether we should re-examine the curriculum that trains mental health professionals across the broad spectrum so that it incorporates the range of psyches and so on of different ethnic groups. So that's one. I teach public health, so I'm a bit... The second point, I mean, maybe it's a bit, I don't know how to articulate this clearly, or I don't want it to be taken in a very negative context. I'm Indo-Trinidadian, and what I found is that to move ahead collectively as a group in societies that could have so many negative challenges or barriers is that you sometimes have to recognize your lived experience, articulate it, yes, but also, I don't want to say discard it, but you need to rise above that. And you need to consider that there is a brighter future ahead. So if we only delve in the challenges and the barriers, we may not necessarily realize our full potential. That's my little comment.
Yeah, I would agree with you. So what I would say is I used to run track, for example, right? And I agree with you, right? Like we need to recognize but not let that, right, stymie us in the progression. And so I think what I'm advocating for us is to become really good like hurdlers, right? It doesn't mean that you let that prevent you from moving forward, but if you were trying to run the race and you don't recognize that there's a hurdle in front of you, I did that a lot of times. Like you're gonna skid across the whole track, right? So we need to understand what's going on so we can, to your point, rise above it. When you have a good, I think, structural analysis, it allows us to attack with greater precision and to rise above as you're talking about. And I agree with the other point you're making too. I do think we need to expand curricula while we also return these tools and technologies to communities. So I think they're both great points that you're making. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And let's give Dr. Auguste another round of applause. Thank you for taking the time to come out and speak with us and be our keynote speaker. Thank you for all the insightful information that you've provided.